Welcome to Nature Inspired. In this podcast, we talk about creating sustainability in health, environment, and relationships. We explore the connection between our individual health and that of the planet and look into what we can do to support the optimal functioning of both. My name is Tanya Wojtaszek, and I'm your host. Today's guest is an experienced facilitator and certified transformational coach with a lifelong passion for personal growth and women's empowerment. Her unique approach to transformation is rooted in 30 plus years of direct experience with powerful, energetic embodiment practices. And these include the Chinese energetic arts of Tai Chi and Qigong, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and the art of feminine and masculine presence. She says growth and change happens when all parts of our beings are aligned to our intentions. And this is why all of our work involves the physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual aspects. Welcome, Lauri McKean.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a delight to be here with you.
Well, it's a delight to have you. I'm so excited that you're on today. And I want to just start out by saying you have such a unique path and combination of skill sets. I'm always impressed by everything that you know. And in addition to what we've already heard in the introduction, you also have experience with permaculture and food prep. And besides being a coach and a licensed acupuncturist and all these other things. So there are so many amazing skill sets combined in this one powerful package. And
Yes,
looking,
I've lived many lives, many
it
lives.
seems like it, yes. And in looking at all of that, what stands out to me is a theme around energy and nature.
hmm
And I wanted to check in with you on, first of all, your definition of nature, because I think you have a little bit of a broader definition than most of us might think of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really thought of a definition of nature. That's a fascinating thing. But in terms of like how mine might differ, I do have a more of an understanding of nature as an energy,
Mm.
not just physical nature like mountains and rivers and trees and things like that. I certainly identify with that physical matter of nature, and we can talk more about my background there. But yes, I do also bring in more of an energetic sense of it, and this is really out of my background, comes out of my background in those more Chinese-based healing arts and philosophies. One thing that people don't realize is that Chinese medicine is actually a nature-based system originally. In the modern world, we think about, when we talk about nature-based systems or philosophies, often in the West, we're talking about those being indigenous, native kinds of traditions. But in the East, in the Eastern cultures, there were also these very nature-based traditions that still influence kind of things like, philosophy and medicine and health, the way people see those in those cultures even today. So nature to me is, yeah, like a an energetic, like I think of ecosystems when I think of nature, basically. It's a web of interactions and connections that I think are really powerful. And I think we're just beginning to understand
Mm.
in this modern culture.
Mm-hmm. Which really fits in perfectly. I never thought of it that way until the moment you just said that, the way you just described that with the web and the interactive, like really fits the permaculture philosophy of whole system approach as well. So Yeah, that's so interesting. I never connected that until now.
Yes. Nature is very, very much that those systems. And yeah, that's one of the things I love both about Chinese medicine and permaculture is they really recognize the web of interactions that are always taking place in these systems. So yeah, it's dynamic. Nature to me is very a dynamic a dynamic thing. And I think that is so powerful. There's so much, yeah, there's just so much potential there as we
Hmm.
begin to interact with it and understand it more.
Hmm. Yeah, and I know nature has been important for you for most of your life. When did that start, and what was sort of your journey with that?
Yeah. Well, I consider myself very fortunate to have grown up in a rural area, Southwest Colorado, in the US. And I grew up with parents who were very into being out in nature. So I spent a lot of time as a kid camping and hiking and, all sorts of things, just being in the wilderness. And and I grew up in an area, I love this too, that I grew up in an area where I was kind of on the edge of the mountains, big, tall, 14,000 foot peaks and the high desert. That's defines that area, Southwest Colorado. So in terms of nature, I got a sense of how dynamic nature right outside my door was and how diverse, and also the edge between the two. And, in permaculture, I always love this idea that the edges are where kind of the juice really, where it's really juicy, where things really happen. And I grew up in an edge of nature between this high desert and mountain system. And so I feel really fortunate that I got to explore that very freely as a kid. And it was kind of I always felt comfortable in nature because of that. I also in that area there's a tremendous amount of influence from the ancient Puebloan culture and the native cultures. And there's Mesa Verde National Park right there where I grew up. And so I also got a sense as a kid of how humans interacted with nature, even, 1,000 years ago, and how, their nature affected them, how they affected nature, and ultimately, that civilization, really changed because of natural, what was going on and changes in the natural system. So that's kind of my foundation, and I love that I have that, that perspective, that foundation from my childhood. And, saying that, I also grew up in a fairly conventional household as well, where, there was a sense of nature as other. It wasn't like there was so much a deep interaction with nature. There was a like we go out and be in nature, we play in nature, but it wasn't a deeper sense of how to connect with nature. So that's been part of my journey, and more of my journey as an adult is evolving that relationship with nature.
Hmm. Yeah, and the concept that we are nature too, we're an integral part of it
Yeah.
is always something that I'm fascinated by, and I know you are too. So that's just
Yes.
yeah, what a great start. That's such a beautiful area to
I know.
have been
Lucky
able to go.
me.
I love Colorado. Yeah, so I yeah. Yeah, and that indigenous peace, having the ability to see that at that point in time and being influenced by that, I think is probably part of why you are where you are now and have done what you've done. I think that's very yeah, a great foundation, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was interesting because I mean part of I don't even know you if you know this history, part of my history, but then, I moved actually to the Midwest where it was a lot more of a cultivated landscape, a lot less of that natural landscape than I was used to. And that's where I started getting more interested in, natural foods, food systems. I was very active in sustainable agriculture. We now call it regenerative agriculture, local and seasonal eating, those kinds of things. So it kind of was like, okay, now I'm going to see what it's like in a sense, to really explore these more cultivated natural systems and what does that have for me as well, and what can I give to that world? So that was another foundational piece for me, like in my 20s.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. What is it that your sort of your exploration of both permaculture or sustainable agriculture and Chinese medicine taught you about our relationship with nature?
Um, well, it's interesting because like I said, I started out more of the gardening, sustainable ag, that kind of thing. And it still was a relationship to nature that was separate. It was like we're more of a steward of nature. We're being more of a steward, but there still was this separation.
Mm,
And even as I moved into studying more permaculture, um, permaculture starts to bring it together a little bit more, and how we become part of the ecosystem in even more integrated and beneficial way. Um, but what I love about the Chinese medicine is the philosophy no longer is about interacting with the natural world. It's really about how the natural world is actually a part of
mm,
us, our internal landscape. So there's these philosophies within Chinese culture, Chinese that are really foundation of Chinese medicine. There's these philosophies about how our bodies, the ecosystem inside of us, mimics and harmonizes with the ecosystem and the cycles and the seasons outside of us, so that there's this constant interaction between the two, and they are, and we are mirroring what is happening outside. So it's much more integration than what I've experienced in other systems, I guess I would say.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, which is part of what we talk about here a lot is that connection between our health and the planet's health, and part of what you were talking about there, I think really points right to that is really what we do to the earth, what we do to ourselves. It's like it's all connected. It's all connected because of what I
Yes.
put into my body. If that is treated in a certain way with chemicals or what have you, then that also then impacts my body and what have you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love that, we're kind of waking up so much to that, it's like the edges, like we go back to permaculture, it's like the edges of the human ecosystem and the natural world ecosystem, where those edges meet, and how dynamic they are and how important they are for both the health of the natural environment as well as our own personal health. And keeping that in mind, I think, is so important. And I love too that a lot of the wisdom within the Chinese five element theory or philosophy has to do with, actually puts us, even though it's framed initially as this will help make us healthier and increase our wellness and health, even though it's framed initially in that, or at least that's how I learned it, it also will help the natural environment. For example, there's a lot of seasonal correspondences in the five element theory. So like there's certain things within each season that correspond to it, and including certain foods that are best for our body to eat in those times. So like in the summer, it's healthiest to eat things like cucumber and watermelon, and there's a whole list of like summertime cooling foods. Well, they happen to also be a lot of the foods that are in season at that time and are naturally available, which, is great in terms of the environmental perspective, coming from my background of local seasonal eating, of like, yeah, it's going to take a lot less resources for us to consume, cucumber and watermelon in the summer than if we were consuming it in the winter. That's when they are available around us, and we don't have all this transportation costs and things like that that end up taking a toll environmentally. So it's kind of a nice win-win system when you're looking at both the human and the environment. So,
Yeah, it's really quite perfect when you step back from that, what we're used to, and is going to a supermarket, grabbing anything we want at any time of the year, pretty much. And it's not really been that way for a very long time. It's really only, I mean, even when I was a child, I can remember there wasn't this amount of abundance in the supermarket that we have now. So it's all fairly recent. And
yes.
the disconnect that we don't understand anymore what's in season at what time of the year. I think we're doing our bodies a huge disservice by just
Mhm.
eating whatever is available at any time, because like you said, there is this connection, and there are foods that are best for us at certain times of the year. And
Yeah.
with I think so many things that we're facing health issues now at this point, where we see so much rise in autoimmunity and in cancer and all kinds of diseases. And I think part of that is what we can do to have our systems function optimally and be able to deal with those issues is to eat seasonally. That was one way we can, like an easy way
Yeah.
we can support our bodies to function at their best. And sadly, we don't see that information much out there. I mean, you have to look for it,
Yeah.
and then you kind of find it, and it's like, oh yeah, it actually makes sense I know when I started looking into that, and it just kind of lands like in my body as like, oh yeah, of course. We used to do this. I actually grew
Mhm.
up with a huge garden where my grandparents and my mom were always out there gardening, and we ate what was in season. And we never ate anything that wasn't in season, except things that maybe we canned, then that we would eat throughout the winter. But
Yes.
yeah, that was my
Yeah.
norm as I was growing up. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it, but now I'm very grateful that that was my experience, and that that's the start that I had. Healthy.
Absolutely. I'm the same way, and it's interesting because I also, grew up. My mom gardened, my mother and my grandmother did all sorts of canning and food preservation. And did not appreciate it. I did not appreciate it until I left home and refound all of that in my 20s in different location. And yeah, and it really helped me not only understand like cycles and seasons more, it those activities grounded me, and I think they ground other people the the reality of the earth,
Mhm.
basically in nature, having to can, if you want tomatoes in the winter, does ground you in that tomato harvest in the summer. And it's such a different thing to open a home can jar of tomatoes versus a store-bought can. And it was really, super satisfying to me back in the mid 90s. There was a group of us that we were involved with a number of community supported agriculture farms in Wisconsin. And the idea behind those community supported agriculture, CSA farms, was that it was really about not just a convenient way to get your vegetables, but it was really about supporting farms, local farms, supporting local agriculture, and getting more in touch with where your food came from and during what season. And there was a group of us that actually developed a whole cookbook that was designed. It's called A Guide to Farm Fresh Seasonal Produce, so a Guide to Farm Fresh Seasonal Eating. Here, I have
Amazing.
it.
What? That's amazing. I don't think I knew about that. That's fantastic.
I know, it's really fun. And yeah, it was so wonderful to be able to kind of provide a resource for people. And at the time, back in the mid 90s, it was like, we ran the first batch of the books. We did it it was, basically home printed, home put together kind of thing. And we did the first batch at like, I think 750 books, and we sold out in 2 weeks because
Wow.
there was such like people really wanted that information, and there was a hunger for how do we connect more into seasonal cycles through our eating. So and little did I know at the time, it also had a connection to all those Chinese medicine piece as well. So
Hmm.
just a very fun thing. I think that is, uh, that desire is out there, and sometimes it is hard if you don't have the resources of how to make those changes. So those resources are definitely out there.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and I think more and more so because I think we're seeing sort of a comeback as far as connecting to gardening in that way. And
Mhm.
like even urban gardens. I have been part of a garden here in town too, that's like a community garden. And I see a lot more interest in that again, sort of coming
Yeah.
up because I think COVID was part of the seeing empty shelves, I think was part of a moment for people and realizing, oh, if anything goes wrong, whatever it might be, well, I'm not going to eat. So I think there
Yeah.
is that connection to, oh, maybe it might be better to have something locally available.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to me that COVID also, brought about the sourdough bread baking revolution as well.
It did, didn't it?
And, and there's this resurgence of certain things, like certain skills, certain, ways of eating. And, I love that focus on fermentation
Mhm.
too. And I kind of delight in this idea that there's so many people now who have little sourdough starters sitting on their counters. Because really that is its own little ecosystem. It's its own, you know, it has all these kind of yeasts and bacteria growing in it. And then we are interacting with it as we bake the bread. We're interacting with it as we consume it. We have this ecosystem inside our guts and well, all over our body, but especially inside the intestines
Mhm.
of, you know, trillions and billion trillions, I don't know how many bacteria. And so it's just like there's always this interaction of ecosystems. And I think starting to recognize that, even just with sourdough bread,
Mhm.
can be can be an opening into really understanding more about the natural world. So,
Mhm.
yay,
Absolutely.
sourdough.
Yay. Yay. And yay, local gardens and seasonal eating.
Yes.
And I heard somewhere, don't remember the source now, but that even just if you do garden yourself and putting your hands in the soil, like the
Hmm.
soil interacts with the gut with the gut um and the soil, they interact with each other, so it strengthens your immune system and your gut bacteria just by simply putting your hands in the soil as well. It's like, wow, when
Hmm.
I heard that, I was like, wow. And I will say from my own life, the time I've been dealing with an autoimmune for many, many years, and the
Yeah.
year I started gardening, I never felt better than I did that year. So, and then continue to get better. But like that
Yeah.
year, it was really eye-opening where every day I was out there, first of all, out in the elements. I got the sun, I got like all kinds of
Yeah.
out in the elements, and then I had my hands in the soil. And then I also noticed that whatever I grew, and like you said earlier, opening that jar of tomatoes or that whatever you canned yourself, I feel like there's a whole other connection to that food and a much deeper appreciation and like reverence that I have when I eat that food than when I grab something from the supermarket and I don't know where it comes from. So
Hmm.
it's like there is much more of that connection of yeah, to place and to the sacredness of
Yeah.
that food that I'm consuming.
Yeah. It is. It is a sacred act.
Hmm.
And it's something that I, again, when we go back to like the energetics, I mean, there's all these things we can't see. There's all this interaction with, bacteria and yeast and viruses and how that whole ecosystem is interacting with our inner ecosystem, our outer ecosystem, the natural ecosystem. There's so many connection points that we see, but there's also these connection points we don't see. And the energetic ones, I think, are especially potent. Well, they're all important. Again, it creates its own web, but I think it's important to remember that there's energetic webs and connections as well. And to me, a lot of those are more the energetic pieces are what create also um, the emotional the emotional reactions, which then has its own set of endorphins and hormones that get released. So there's just so much that we can influence, and we forget with like, basic nutrition. It's not just about vitamins and minerals and fats and calories and all of that. There's all these pieces of like the microbiome of the ecosystem, and then the energetics as well, and how that interacts with our emotional states. Yeah, it's just so fun because there's a tendency when you told me that story, interesting, the story of the gardening. I found myself with this tendency of like trying to figure out what element made the biggest difference. What was it that made you feel better? And then I had to back away and catch myself and go, there's thousands of elements there, some which we know of, some which we don't, and somehow this web created this effect of you felt healthier, better when you were gardening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's a fascinating dance. I think we're
Mm-hmm.
in this soup of energy and little, you know, and all the components of nature from the microscopic to the very large. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it's it gets me excited to think about that dance of co-creation that we're in
Mm-hmm.
with ourselves, our health, and nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard you mention five elements a few times. Would you mind explaining a little bit what that means? Because I'm not sure that everybody has heard of that yet.
Yeah, yeah. So again, with the ancient Chinese thought philosophy that was nature-based, there came a system, there evolved a system that is known as the five elements, five phases, or wuxing in the Chinese language. And it's really all about explaining correspondences. It's correspondences in natural systems and our own bodies. So I love it because it is so attuned to not seeing nature as something outside of the human realm, but it's really shows us how nature's elements and cycles are actually a part, an integral part of ourselves. So for example, like in the spring, there are all these correspondences, including the element of wood, which is basically what we call flora these days. So the wood element or flora element, and we can see it out in nature, but we can also begin to look at how it affects health, how our bodies are in the wood element of our bodies is in harmony. So the wood element corresponds to things like the liver, the gallbladder. It corresponds to eyes, ligaments, tendons. It corresponds to the emotion of anger. So there's all these pieces to our emotional and physical energetic makeup inside of us that correspond to the the element of wood, again, flora, or and the season of spring. So it's a way that we diagnose and treat in Chinese medicine is kind of through this lens. And it's wonderful because it's the basics can be learned and understood by any layperson as well. One of the things that I've done is created just a short guide of each one of the elements, the and the seasons, and how those relate to our bodies and our emotions, and then things that we can do to harmonize a little bit more, harmonize the natural world around us and the cycle we're in nature with our own bodies. Um, so hoping that explains it. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of just wanted to give a little bit of an idea because five elements is like might not mean much to a lot of people. So to just have a little bit of an explanation, I think that was great. And that is the guide that I think our listeners are going to get to enjoy. Is that correct? Is that the one?
Yes,
Yes, I'm very
yes,
excited about that.
I do have it.
So yeah, there'll be a
Yeah,
link to it, which I'm very
yeah.
excited
And
about sharing.
it's you know, I call it nurturing nature within,
Mm,
harmonizing with nature's elements for greater health, vitality, and wellness. So it really is about, again, that interaction and the harmonization
mhm,
of us with the natural world,
mhm.
natural world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So is there I know we've already kind of woven in a few tips and a few things what people can do to incorporate those more into our daily lives with like seasonal eating. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you would want to share that people, that's an easy thing that people could do, or ways you can recommend working with nature more deeply?
Mm, yeah, there's a couple of things, just beyond the guide that's available. One thing that I was thinking that I just feel is really important, and this actually even comes more out of the transformational coaching background, is this idea of opening, in coaching and kind of personal development world, we often talk about like opening up to possibilities, not staying in this narrow focus of rigid thinking, oh, this is bad, this is good, that kind of thing. Because I really feel like nature invites us, when we really think about it, nature invites us into a much broader process of, and conceptualization of every situation. If we open up to that and we allow it, it really invites us into bigger picture thinking, into seeing interconnections, being aware of the web of factors and interactions. um, it invites us into, like, again, more of that systems thinking. Um,
Mhm.
and and so, sometimes even just taking a moment, if you're dwelling on a good, bad kind of situation, a problem, just taking a moment to even just like look out the window or go walk outside and just start to look at, like, how's this tree is interacting with that, mycorrhizae and fungi, and oh my gosh, and that bird is spreading the seed, it's eating the seed of this tree and spreading it over here, and the sunlight is coming in and photosynthesis is happening in every one of these trees, as well as this whole connection to all the nutrients from the earth. And just to start to open up like that and just can really affect how we approach a problem, even if the problem isn't related to nature, it's just a way to kind of help open us up to possibilities. So I really encourage folks to do that, and to allow nature and nature's web to inspire more systems thinking in everything in daily life. So that's a huge piece. And then, of course, the other piece that I'm always, I've already talked about a little bit, is the harmonizing with the seasons more. There's just so much juice when we kind of recognize what's happening in each season, um, on both like a physical level as well as an energetic level, and to kind of begin to mimic some of that. So, in the springtime, really feeling into the energy of the spring, which is all about growth and reawakening, and the storage of winter, the energy that's been stored is being released, and there's this growth and all about life, and really feeling into that in the spring, which in this culture isn't that hard to do. In this culture, I think we have the hardest time harmonizing with the energy of winter.
Mhm.
And winter has a lot more to do with going inward, more quiet, more introspection, and just less activity. Spring is about activity. Winter's about storing, resting, going inward. And I think it's fascinating that in our Western culture at this point, we've created, like we've created the heart of winter. We've taken the heart of winter in December and made it into this festival of like activity and movement and light and sound and go and do this and stress and pressure. And it's really antithetical to the energy in that's happening in nature at that time, in winter. And so taking a look at that, I think, is an important thing for most people, because what we do in each season affects the other seasons. It's not just winter that is affected by how we are in winter. If we're not taking in and storing and going deep in the winter, it's going to affect how we feel in the summer too, because our stores will have been depleted. So really taking time to feel into that, especially with more frenetic holiday traditions. Are they really serving us? And, you know, looking at as well at how those holiday traditions, while they have a sense of connecting us to others, um, and making us happier, that we are missing kind of the deeper connections within sometimes, and the deeper connections with each other because of the surface level frenetic energy that can happen. So yeah, that's one of the times that I see for most of us culturally that we're most out of touch with the seasonal natural rhythm. And I think it's important to kind of moderate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I definitely feel like in the winter I need more sleep and I need more um yeah, more rest in general. And it's taken me a long time, but I finally am at a place now where I allow myself that. I give myself permission to slow down and to
Yes.
um get that rest whenever I need it. Like I go to a dance group on one day out of the week, and this week I was not feeling it. I was like, you know what? I'm
Yeah.
really feeling internal. I'm not feeling like going out there. And so I was like, yeah, I'm not going. It's just one little tiny example of like, no, my
Yes.
body needs to be inside, needs to be warm. It needs to just like rest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And beautiful that you're listening to that. And I mean, one of the things that I think winter season teaches us that is that we can practice listening more
Mm-hmm.
easy when we go into that deeper, more internal space. It is an opportunity to actually develop those self-listening skills. So,
Mm-hmm.
yay.
Yeah, yeah. And those are so, so, so incredibly important when we think about interactions with other people and interactions in
Mm.
relationships. I know you work a lot around boundaries as well.
Yeah.
And like that is a whole aspect as well that impacts our health, can impact our health in a pretty significant way when we're not setting those boundaries where it seems like, oh, just this one time, or this is maybe not that important. And like over time, there is an impact on that. Is there something you can share about that piece?
Yeah, I mean the boundaries. Oh, there's I could share for hours on that piece.
I'm sure.
Um, what I guess just briefly to tie it into nature and the focus here is that just as you said, first of all, boundaries are just absolutely a foundational piece of health and wellness. Our relationships are, and how we do our relationships has a lot to do with boundaries. It's not a bad word. We think of boundaries as a mean thing, like pushing people away. But nature, look around, there's tons of boundaries. there are boundaries everywhere in nature, and there's an interaction between boundaries. Again, those edges in permaculture that we talk about that are so active and important, those are boundaries, and they're dynamic. And so remembering that boundaries are important and boundaries are natural, looking in nature for some motivation, for some guidance around boundaries can be very helpful as well. And super important in the winter when we often need to be in more of that internal space and less of the interaction with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being here today, for sharing all your wisdom. You have so much information, so much wisdom to share. And I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today and share everything that you did share.
Well, thank you. It is a joy to be here, a joy to be with you. And yeah, just invite everyone to download that free guide
Yep.
with some very simple tips about harmonizing nature within with nature in the seasons outside of us.
Absolutely. Yes, the link will be in the notes. So make sure you get that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.